Thank you for joining us on this special edition of From the Lectern. We are talking about the Southern Baptist Convention, which happened just a week ago, giving our reflections on that. This is Courtlandt Perkins. This is his third convention.
Yep, third time.
And I don't know how many this is for me, but I would guess maybe more than 5, less than 10.
Okay.
So we're grateful to be sort of having this conversation. So Courtlandt, first initial sort of ideas as we jump into this conversation about the convention in 18.
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons why we're doing this special edition video is because, you know, as this being my third time, recognizing that, man, it really does matter who shows up. It really does matter to actually be in the room where all the things are going on that people find out on via social media mostly, or blogs afterwards. But just being there, being, you know, kind of, sometimes we can think about denominations and evangelicalism as this kind of nebulous thing that kind of floats around and has all these issues, but we don't really know how to address it. But actually going to the convention helps you to see that we're talking about people who really are doing ministry, people who really do have some of the issues that we'll get into and the things that the convention brought up. But man, nothing can truly replace actually being there, actually being in the room and being able to observe what's going on and engaging with people all across the country who come to this one-time event, and then we go back and do our thing. But yeah, that's the kind of the first thing that even prompted this video, is just the reflections from, you know, both of us were actually there, and we'll have some insights that you just can't get unless you were actually there. Yeah,
there's a mood in the room. There's a feel. There's something in the air that you just cannot catch via people tweeting about it, as you're saying, or just the live stream online. And so, and I think that's so true, because different things happen in environments like this, and it's hard to really get the full effect of it having not actually been there. So what we're going to do is that we're going to share with you guys just some observations and reflections that we've sort of come up with as a collective. Courtlandt and I had talked about this a good bit. I've discussed this with other people to get their insights, to see what they had to say. And we're just going to march down through a couple of things that we observed and some reflections that we have on it. And so, first of all, Courtlandt, when I asked you this question initially, you said the makeup of who was there, the demographic makeup of the people who were at the convention. Tell me what you think about. Tell me about that.
Yeah, you know, honestly, and I think others have said this as well. More and more, especially as a young African-American leader, prayerfully pastor someday, the convention looked like a place where I belonged. It looked like people who not only looked like me, but believed accordingly to, you know, share similars in ministry convictions and doctrinal convictions. And just the feel of the room was a place that is starting to look more and more like the kingdom diversity that we want to see in local churches, which is kind of a buzz topic right now. But for me, one of the things that I observed was that the people who were there, the messengers, weren't just white males. And, you know, I think sometimes that is the narrative, that the Southern Baptist Convention is a Southern white male dominated convention, and to be fair, sure, it still has that as its a large contingent of who represents Southern Baptists, but that's not the totality, or even, I would even say, the future per se of Southern Baptists and the convention as a whole, at least as this convention showed, was that our future looks a little bit more diverse, both ethnically and even gender as well. So that was one of the things. Just noticed that, man, it was a place where I wasn't, you know, I didn't stick out like a sore thumb.
So. And it also seems just so. I think my first convention was just over a decade ago, as I'm thinking as you're talking, and I have seen this change happening slowly over time, but it seemed like it happened much more rapidly in between Phoenix and Dallas. So that's an encouraging thing to see those demographics come up. You mentioned ethnicity and gender, which we'll actually revisit gender in a moment.
Sure.
But something that I also noticed is that There was rural churches, there were suburban churches, there were urban churches represented, there were church plants, there were people at First Baptist, established county seat churches. There are people who were at revitalizations. And so there was all different types of churches represented there, which I think that gives us a more healthy understanding of the swath of churches that are represented in Baptist life,
Right.
or in particular Southern Baptist life. So that demographic question, I think, is actually a good introduction into the optics of what was going on there at the convention.
Yeah, and also old and young, both were well represented. One of the cool things that I noticed when the convention first started was I think whoever was leading on initially the first session, I think asked the crowd, if this is your first time attending, please stand. And literally, at least from where I was sitting, thousands stood. I mean, like, so I don't know if it was the majority, but a large number of the convention, this was their first time going. So I think that says something about just new people, new experiences being included in what it means to be Southern Baptist, and just new, fresh perspectives probably as well. So I think that's something that, probably you wouldn't be able to know unless you were there as well, is that a lot of the people that were present in Dallas, this was their first time at the convention. So I think that says something.
That's good. And so just in general, we're talking about 15,000 people were present. If we go back to the numbers only a year ago and even 2 years ago, of the 15,000, just over 11,000 were messengers officially sent as voting members of churches. And then we had about 4,500 visitors. Last year, we had just over 5,000 messengers with about 3,000 or 2,500 visitors. It just shows you the larger numbers that were here than that were at Dallas than at Phoenix or even in St. Louis the year before. I think some of that has to do with a lot of the sort of the underlying realities that went towards in the last couple of months before this convention.
Yep.
Dr. Patterson and all that was going on at Southwestern Seminary.
Right.
There was what was seen as a very pivotal presidential election going on at this convention.
Yep.
And so this seemed to draw out a lot more people than we would have normally seen at a convention. What I hope to see is that this sort of participation, this level of participation, will continue to be the case from everyone who was there, who's seen the benefit of having been in this space and not just watching it unfold, but actually participating with a ballot in hand.
Yeah.
So as a result of the situations with Dr. Patterson, unfortunately, and then there's other leaders in our convention that have fallen in recent days. Christian George, our very own Alvin Reed, who we love, Frank Page, who's the president of the executive committee, the CEO of our convention. I mean, these are people that I've known, spent time with, did ministry alongside. How did that influence some of what happened at the convention in your estimation?
Yeah, I think that more than last year, it was just a sensitivity to these issues that caused many to just be transparent about sin, to be transparent about the need, not just for some cultural change, but for a change that only God can do, a spirit influence change that the Southern Baptist Convention needs, and that its leaders would be in need of. I feel like even from what was brought up from the floor, the auxiliary events that occurred, there was panel discussions that tackled the Me Too era that we're living in, and Church Too hashtags, this way it's been touted on social media, but more importantly, the lives that have been affected by the mistreatment of our sisters even within the church. I think that the tenor of the event as a whole seemed to be moved by these realities in a way that I think just made us more transparent. We were calling things out that needed to be called out. Even we'll get into the other things that happened that were that caused friction and there was mixed emotions about. But I think just overall, just the convention and the events that were held alongside the convention, such as the panel discussions, and I know the Dhati Lewis, Dr. Dhati Lewis, even had an event addressing the racial divides within our local churches, and just all these different things I feel like spoke to a transparency that I think kind of was a part of what was going on, everything that went on at the convention. I feel like transparency is one of those words that really stand out, that kind of captures some of the statements that were made, and just kind of even what was presented from the stage. So
I think that transparency was sort of birthed out of this somber mood.
Yeah.
One that was, there's a little bit more of a humility in the air as a result of a lot of our heroes having fallen. And I think that is, unfortunately, the Lord can use those difficult things to get us to a place where we should have been.
Yeah.
And I think because of that dynamic in the room, the meeting was actually more productive than we actually might have assumed it to be. So one of the things that we did do that was on the agenda is to elect a new president.
Yeah.
Ken Hemphill, who was a former president of Southwestern Seminary before Dr. Patterson got there, was one candidate, and then J.D. Greer, the pastor of the Summit Church in Durham, North Carolina, was the other candidate. So I mean, prior to the convention, this was or at least 2 or 3 months prior to the convention, this was the thing that was going to draw the numbers out. You know, it was touted as the old guard versus the new guard. It was touted as those who are the John 3:16 sort of traditionalists versus the Reformed crew. In every way possible, it was sort of seen as this showdown at Red Rock. And so, and people were saying that there's going to be people bust in from Louisiana just for the vote. People bust in from Oklahoma and then leaving right after the vote. And so there was this momentum that was leading up to the convention that had to do about this presidential race, because everyone, I mean, even I was saying, you know what, whatever happens with this election, I think is sending a signal about what the future of Southern Baptist is.
Yeah.
And so, and really, we had two people who I think were very good people. Ken Hemphill has a wonderful track record. He's a really good guy. There were some folks who were for him that he might, question their motives or why they were for him. And and so on, but that's a whole different conversation. But this was really seen as the main event of the convention. And so what we understand is that Pastor J.D. Greer won with 68+% vote count, and he's our new Southern Baptist Convention president for a year, and then he'll run again next year. But our practice as a convention is not to have anybody run against the president. They're sort of unanimously brought back in for a second year to give him 2 years to run. That's just kind of a little bit of background on that. So what do you think was one of the biggest positives that allowed J.D. Greer to win the election so handedly? 60, I mean, that's almost a 70-30 split.
Right. I think, just JD's proven leadership to kind of rally around what should be our main drum that we beat, which is missions. We cooperate. We do all that we do, hopefully, with the mission of God in mind. And JD has a track record of being able to communicate through his local church leadership, through books that he's written, through sermons that he's preached, to rally around that point. He's led North Carolina churches in North Carolina State Convention in giving to the cooperative program for the last 2 years. He sent missionaries in droves from his church all over the world. And I think that those things kind of just created a track record for him, for the Southern Baptist Convention as a whole, young and old, to get behind a leader who is pointing us in that direction. Well, obviously, there's many other things that go into who should be elected, and the type of guy that's supposed to, or type of person that's supposed to lead the convention. But I think those are some of the things that I think he led well in, and will continue to lead us well in as we go forward. So.
I mean, to be honest with you, I think what we see in Dr. Greer is someone who has an appreciation for the past of the convention as a 2-time grad of a Southeastern seminary,
Right.
of a Southern Baptist seminary, that is, and then also having been an IMB personnel for 2 years, he understands who Southern Baptists have been in the best sense of the word. That notwithstanding, he does see a vision, has a vision for us to continue to press forward into missional and gospel faithfulness into the future. And some of the issues that he is raising up is, okay, we have to get this, racial reconciliation business right. We do have to keep the mission of proclaiming the gospel central. We have to, now, as we'll talk about in a moment, there's this conversation about gender that is we need to talk about it, and we need people to lead us through that. And really, at the Summit Church, we see baptisms that in one event we see more people getting baptized, on a Sunday than most churches baptized in a year. So there's things that I think he brings to the table that are the best of what we have been, but really the hope for the future as well.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful to call him the president of our convention. Even now. So with this, so the presidency is the sort of tip top of a larger structure and system that we have in place as a convention. Some people talk about the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Well, if you have 47,000 churches cooperating, in those 47,000 churches, you have some 6.5 million people. Of course, there's going to be some structure that organizes all these people, especially if you're a denomination that says we are a people that we want to be governed from the grassroots up, from the pew to the executives or the officers. So that takes some apparatus. And what we saw, I think, in Dallas is that Southern Baptists trust the system. So, and the system is basically the way in which we do our denominational polity, that we have, boards of trustees. We have, that the people vote on those, on a group of people who then appoints trustees for all the entities, be it Lifeway or ERLC or the seminaries or, in the mission boards. And then, that's the way in which the people who are from the pews and from the churches end up having authority by putting people in the place who then put people in the place to hold our leadership accountable.
Yeah.
On 2 incidents at the convention, there was one motion to defund the ERLC, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, and then there was another move, which was to question the validity of the decisions made by the executive committee, that's a subcommittee within the Board of Trustees at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, for the removal of Paige Patterson from the presidency. So, and on both of those, overwhelmingly, Southern Baptists said, we are going to trust the system that's in place. This has been something that's worked for us. This has been something that's been helpful. But something that rings in the back of my mind is, okay, well, if systems aren't perfect,
Right.
structures aren't perfect. As a person of color, there's been a lot of systemic injustices dealt towards my, people like my own family.
Right.
So I have a knee-jerk response to question all systems and structures. Not that I conclude that all of them are broken, but the question is always there.
Absolutely.
So, having said that, I do see how this structure can be one that's equitable, but how might you help us, Courtlandt, think through how this structure and how these processes and systems could be even more equitable?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I appreciate about this system that is in place is that if you have a voice, you can use it, and it's just as viable as anybody else's. There isn't a hierarchy when it comes to when we gather. Literally, anybody can come to the mic.
Literally, anybody can come to the mic
and say whatever they want to say.
For better or for worse.
For better or for worse. And while that's messy, I think that it empowers people. And I think that one thing that we can do going forward is make sure that we're empowering people from people that do not look like us in ways that are a little bit more intentional. So what that look like is from whether it be from the executive committee level, whether our trustees, our different boards that trustees in various entities or Southern Baptist entities, inviting people of color, people, women into those positions, so that even at all levels, those voices are heard, and we don't just have to wait until the convention every year in order for the opportunity to go up to a mic, but all throughout the year. From the trustee level to all these different other committees that we have those other voices being represented. So I just think in the future, the intentionality to put people in those places, to vote them in, and also when it comes to the convention, seeing those people in those places, I think creates a vision for those who look like them to then come to the convention and be a part and go up to the mic, and because they see people who look like them, who are from their background in these positions, so they, again, like I was saying earlier, feel like this is a place for me, this is a place for my voice, and I can voice what my perspective, and it's going to be valued and not just marginalized away until basically it's unheard.
Yeah. And so, and I appreciate that, because the system itself seems to be fairly equitable if we get the right people, the right representation into the seats.
Yeah.
And that just to affirm those groups that you brought to the table, but I would then say, diversity amongst large church pastors and small church pastors, lay people versus clergy. I would say those inside the South, those outside of the South, those in different type of, rural, suburban, urban environments. And so these are the sorts of mixes that we're trying to get into these roles so that we can be able to make moves in very positive ways as a denomination for people doing ministry in all sorts of places throughout our country. So another conversation that we begin to see come up over and over again was a conversation about gender and gender roles. And so this a lot of this was coming out of the unfortunate events coming out of the sort of Me Too, Church Too realities, but also specifically in Southern Baptist life out of the circumstances that surrounding Dr. Patterson at Southeastern and at Southwestern, and all the presidents of all the seminaries were saying this is we are trying to create spaces where women are valued, where women and all students are safe to study. And, and then questions from the floor about gender, and all the entities for the most part were brought. Women were very present at the mic in numbers that were unprecedented at any other convention of its type, which I think is very appropriate, saying that this is the 100th year that women could be messengers at the Southern Baptist Convention. And so I actually want to do a study looking at has there been a rise in the percentage of female messengers since that point, and then juxtaposing that with the next 10 years, as my own little study. But I think it's appropriate for us to see that vocal involvement here on at the convention itself. But also, I think this opens up a conversation because I think what we're seeing is the emergence of different perspectives on gender roles, both in denominational life, which is sort of non-church realities like seminaries, mission boards, ERLC, and denominational leadership like the presidency of the convention. As Reverend Dwight McKissick raised that question, can a woman be the president? He says yes, and he says I'll vote for Beth Moore, which is what he said. He's very pointed with his question and answer. So those sorts of questions need to be asked, and women in denominational life, also women in the local church. What can women do? And so there's this conversation that I'm seeing open up. There's this sort of there's these two broad camps sort of developing. One or more people are calling them harder line commentarians. Others are more soft commentarians. Yet both adhering to the Baptist Faith and Message 2000 and even the Danvers Statement on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. Both of those positions fit within those documents, and I think that we're gonna have a fruitful, I pray, conversation about how women ought to, interact robustly in church life on the one hand, and then denominational life on the other hand. And so for the sake of time, we'll just sort of put that one out there, and we'll do our best to continue the conversation as time passes.
Yep.
Another thing that happened I thought was very positive is that there's always the conversation about resolutions. We passed a wonderful, theologically rich resolution on immigration. There was no contesting it. It flew over with flying colors. We voted on the resolutions in a block, or we were offered to vote on resolutions in a block. If there was any messenger of the 11,000 who were there could have said, no, let's vote on that one individually. Others were brought out to discuss individually, to have subtle, friendly amendments to, but that was not one of them. Southern Baptists affirmed the reality that we ought to care for the immigrant and the sojourner and the foreigner, and there's lots of implications for that, especially in the current moment. But we'll just sort of affirm that reality for now, for the sake of time. And what was one of the most lasting things that hit you or was for you at the convention this year? I've been talking for a minute. I'll just pass it back over to you.
Yeah, just another mention on resolutions that were passed. There was a clear resolution passed that denounced the doctrine of the curse of Ham, which is important. While it's one of those things where it's like, well, why does it take you so long to do something like that? True, I affirm that. But at the same time, I think it's a win that Southern Baptists are being clear that we want to distance ourselves away from any inkling of using the Bible to support white supremacy. Part of that started with last year's events in regards to the alt-right and the resolution that got passed in regards to that. But I think this just continues to make that very much so a clear statement that we want to make, and I think it's worth making, as that doctrine has no place in anybody's church, and we're saying that it shouldn't have any places in Southern Baptist churches. So that's just another mention of another resolution that passed. That was another bright spot for me.
Yeah, all right, that's good.